You're watching something that's different and better and luckier than even what was on the page.
Yep.
Then you say, I had the right career, I made the right choice, I love my work.
So much for joining us at the Hollywood Reporter Producers Roundtable. I'm so excited to jump into this conversation. And to begin with, we're going to start with an icebreaker for everyone. What did your first job as a producer entail?
It was one of the few movies that I had the luxury of shooting in Los Angeles. That's only happened a few times. And the location scout came to me and said, they're asking us to pay again. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, there's people that don't necessarily want us to be here and they want us to pay again. And so I think I was sort of naive enough not to understand what that was. So I went and somehow talked my way through it and we got to stay. But it dawned on me halfway through that it was sort of a side deal they were looking for. So sort of navigated through that.
That's a hard one to jump right off into the fire on that one. Amy, what about for you?
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to do that. Well, I worked for a man named Tony Garnett for a very long time who was a producer. Then I became a studio executive. And then I stayed being a studio executive for a really long time. Then I got fired, became a producer. So the first movie that I worked on as a producer, I had no idea when you were allowed to talk to the director. Right? Because, you know, when you run the studio, you like come on the set and everybody's like, yeah, hi, you know, you can do whatever you want. But like schleppedick producer, right? So I would just go up to the director after, they're like, we're doing the master. You're not allowed to like give notes already. It's like, I had no idea when you were allowed to talk. So that's what I learned. That was my first thing to learn.
I've just been watching Amy thinking, I think I have the least experience as a producer because I was an executive for so long.
This whole...
Yeah, so I feel like actually my experience of producing was watching other producers truthfully. Yeah. So when I started a company, I was really lucky that one of my first films was to make a film with another producer. Yeah. And that producer was a guy called Ed Guiney.
Yeah. What's the best thing that you learned from watching Ed?
Everything, to be honest. So literally from how the production team worked, from his own team working with them, from budgeting to managing how we crewed up, just generally the on-set stuff, because it's very different as an exec that you're involved so much in development and looking at what the budget might mean and what financing might mean and often delivering. So editing is a big part of being an exec as well. Yeah. But as a producer, it was the on-set experience that I just had no real knowledge of. Yeah. Other than like you being welcomed like a queen. Yeah. Really not knowing what to do.
Queen was great.
Yeah.
Monique, what about for you?
Well, I fell into producing in grad school and started producing all of my peers' films because there were no other producers in the program. And so one of the projects that I worked on was a short film called Skunk with my creative collaborator, Annie Silverstein, who I ended up making my first feature with. But on that, we were breaking all the cardinal rules. We were working with kids and animals. So already we were starting off challenging ourselves. And then I learned that if you are thinking you might have pickups, you should really store your set design, because several months later, we returned to the house that we were filming in, which was a location, it was just someone's house. And we were, reshooting part of this makeout scene, and we needed the couch. It was very important, and so we said, and she was like, yeah, sure, you can come back and film. And we were like, oh, you still have the couch, right? And she was like, the couch? And we were like, yeah, the couch that you had several months ago. And she was like, oh, that couch, it's out back. And I was like, out back? And she was like, yeah, in the field out back. There was a field behind the house.
Oh, it wasn't a field.
And it was, exposed to all the elements. And so we had to pick up the couch in a pickup truck and just clean it, trying to get all the, whatever was growing on it by that point. So that was a big lesson for me.
Pulling a couch from a field. You gotta love it.
Like, this is producing.
Samantha, what about for you?
Well, I
am in independent film, which is a lot different than executive people, which I've done everything because my job is to make sure that the movie gets made, no matter what happens. And I would say as a full producer, we made Red Rocket at the very beginning of the pandemic, which was a very strange time.
I love that movie.
Yes, we made it with 10 people.
10 people.
Yes, we wore many hats. Yeah. And one of my jobs, I mean, we did everything. Whatever needed to be done, we made sure it got done. And one of those things was I would apply when needed Simon Rex's prosthetic penis. Yes, it's prosthetic. So I'd be running lines with him in the car, like,
And putting his penis on.
and then I'd be like, okay, are you ready now? And we'd go, and we got very, very close. And there was one point it's funny, I was just talking about it yesterday, where just to make sure that it would stay on while he was running, I said, hey, I'm gonna take a video. Can you just stand up and like do some jumping jacks? And so I had Simon Rex doing jumping jacks with the prosthetic penis on, but it made him look like he was naked. And so I was showing the production designer, I was like, so this looks good, right? And she's like, you need to take that off your phone now. Yeah. And so it's off my phone.
You're on public Wi-Fi. You're like,
Yeah,
why?
exactly. Cloud what? Yeah. So, yes.
Amazing. Lucy, what about for you?
I'm asked to follow that story.
Yeah. Any prosthetic penises in your oeuvre?
I also was an executive for 25 years, so I would say the main thing that I learned about being a producer is, as an executive, you can tell people, you should fix this. But when you're the producer, you're the person you have to tell to fix the thing.
Yeah.
And we did have the cat's asshole fall out on Stuart Little.
Oh my God. You've matched the story.
How does that happen?
It prolapses because of stress. Anyway, it went back in. We continued to shoot.
Wow. That cat, a trooper.
A real trooper. But the idea that your job is to fix the problem as opposed to identify the problem for somebody else to fix was a big adjustment. And I think the hardest part of being a producer and the most fun part is trying to figure out the problems while on your feet, while 20 other things are going on, and trying to remember what's the most important thing I should be paying attention to right now, so I'm not paying attention to the thing no one's going to care about, and I am paying attention to the thing that's going to ruin the movie if it doesn't get fixed. So that's the hardest part, and I called Kathy Kennedy for advice many times.
Yeah.
And she knew the answer to everything. So
About the cat.
not about that one.
Yeah. But now you know so much about a cat's anatomy, so priceless information. Tessa, I was reading that you had the rights to Conclave for a while since the book came out, and when you decided to make the movie, ultimately you all made it outside of the studio system. You made it independently. I'm wondering, what was the choice behind that? Was it because of the subject matter? Did you ever try to go the studio route, or did you know this is a film that requires?
That's a very clever question.
Yeah.
Because you saying you decided to make the movie and then you decided to go the independent route. And I think that's so generous of you, as though I have any control at all of my choices. So it was the second turn of the financing that led us to an independent structure, which is why it took so long. So I didn't option the book not to make the movie, but it did take me quite a long time to get through the rounds of making sure we made it right. And of course that meant we had a little less money and a little more stress, and having to have all those elements in place at the one time to be able to go out and sell the movie in the way that we had to finance it.
Yeah.
But actually, it again gave us the freedom that we needed, which in the end turned out to be the right thing. It's that weird thing, isn't it, that everything ends up snowballing and you think that was horrible and that was horrible. But actually, it all made for the right movie in the end. So.
Yeah. Amy, you said something really interesting.
I did?
Yeah. When you read the Challenger's screenplay, the quote is that it was very rare that commercial movies are about adult relationships and about sex. And I was so interested by that because there's been a lot of talk just generally among movie fans, among the industry, about a lack of sex in modern movies, especially compared to cinema of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But I'm wondering, how did you know you could get the script made knowing that?
Hiring Luca to direct the movie, I knew that he knows how to make movies about people, and he knows how to make movies about people's bodies, and how people being free with their bodies and who they are. And because the movie is about athletes, it was really important to him that they treated themselves in the way they walked and the way they looked, the way that athletes do. And what I liked about the movie is it was a really modern story. It was a really unjudgmental story about how people love each other and the different ways that people love each other in the modern world where they're allowed to. And there's no judgment, and he has no judgment about things like that. And it really was him that made it the movie that it became.
Yeah. When you were taking it out to find potential studio partners, did you all hear any pushback about the amount of sex, or because you had
No,
Luca?
because nobody knew how much sex Luke was going to put in the movie till we made it. The real pushback that we got was about the ending. That was like everyone we talked to is like, well, who won?
Yeah.
And we're like, well, no one won. That wasn't the point of the movie. It wasn't about tennis. What are you talking about? And that was the thing that people. Let's be honest. My first question to the writer when I read it was, "Who won?" Too. So I'm a big liar. Yeah. But then I got really confident about saying, "Well, it's just ambiguous."
Yeah. It's up to interpretation.
Yeah, because the movie is about the thing that you fear the most, the thing that you desperately hope will never fucking happen. And then it happens, and you survive it. And I thought that was, that really moved me.
Yeah. Samantha, you and your filmmaking team consulted with sex workers ahead of making Anora.
There's a bunch of sex.
Yeah.
She's just all over that.
Yeah.
I got it.
I am wondering, what did that outreach look like, and how did that consultation, how did those relationships ultimately inform what the movie became?
Oh, it's everything, because number one to the movies is authenticity. And I think the luxury that we do have is, I'm super lucky because in the situation that I'm in, I get to work with my partner and everything. And so that's pre-development, that's everything. And so working with consultants started from the very, very beginning. And then when we were in New York, because of the authenticity, Sean doesn't, because we cast too, so I was calling around to find real dancers instead of people pretending to be dancers.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because everyone involved ended up kind of being a consult. Sean is very collaborative. So if someone thinks that something is wrong or misrepresented, he's very clear about, hey, I want you to speak up, because that's just the way that we work. If we like it when people speak up and say, this is not how it is. It's more like this. And then there's a conversation and we switch it. I remember looking for the dancers. I had a consultant who would even connect me with as many dancers as possible. And it was interesting because some of them would say, oh my gosh, I really want to be a part of this because this is very similar to something that actually happened to me, or this happened to a friend of mine. So then that made us know that we were being authentic in certain ways or on the right track, and then that informed certain parts of the story to be explored more.
Yeah. Monique, you also have people who have these lived experiences in your movie. And there's so much talk about the importance of physical safety on set, but it's also important to maintain a sense, I can imagine, of mental and emotional safety. And a lot of your cast for Sing Sing were formerly incarcerated performers, and you were shooting in prison. Was that something that you were talking with them beforehand? Is it something that you were, that you had in mind heading into production? And if so, what were those conversations like with your cast?
Yeah, so that was, the casting approach was something that we knew from the start that we wanted to work with professional actors and with folks from the community from this program and find that alchemy. Greg was really interested in that, and so am I. And so once we knew that we were going to shoot in a decommissioned prison, which, we didn't have money to, build a set or build a prison set, but also the movie was really about, again, similarly, like the authenticity and the truth of it and the truth of these institutions that are all around us. And so my very first thought was, okay, well, we don't want to re-traumatize our cast. These men who are putting themselves out there, they're being vulnerable for us. They're really trusting us, and I knew that it was a big responsibility for us as filmmakers to take care of them as much as possible. So I said, how can we create a safe space for them to feel, because we don't know what's going to come up. Some of them hadn't returned to prison. Some of them, they talked about how they don't even wear the color green because of the experience of putting greens back on would be traumatizing. So I started talking to a number of therapists and eventually found a therapist that had volunteered at Sing Sing before and knew a lot of the alumni cast. So, we talked and we said, he said, we don't know what could happen. And also, it's a very masculine thing to really bury your feelings. So we invited him to set to be a resource, and ultimately realized that our cast wasn't necessarily engaging with therapy in a traditional sense. But they shared with us that there were, moments of catharsis. I think that because they were all kind of coming together, it was almost like the movie was a reunion of this program. In a sense, so that there was a support system between a lot of the cast as well, and some of our cast said the importance of sharing the story with the world really surpassed any sort of apprehension they had around going back into prison.
May I ask a question?
Yeah,
But
please.
did you have to put kind of aftercare in the sense of all the people that you engaged with on those two films who were from another world, not the film world? Have you continued to support them post? Is that something that you've had to engage with?
I think that the journey of the film is still ongoing even to this day, and so we're very much in touch and close and always kind of checking in with each other. Divine G, the real Divine G, who Coleman plays in the movie, he calls everyone all the time. Like everyone calls each other, and we try to have group gatherings beyond, the screenings that we've been having.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
That's brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, same here. I mean, it's you really, after so much time and after so many people's generosity, we are so appreciative. So we do keep in touch. I mean, for every film, there are people from the Florida Project. Like everyone, you become really close as human beings, and you're just like, I'm not coming in and taking whatever and jumping out. It's like you
keep going.
You care about them.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You become a family in a way.
Yeah, it's not a curtain down situation. It's an ongoing conversation.
Exactly.
It sounds like. Yeah.
Exactly.
And we've talked about original productions, but there is such difficulty into stepping back into another world. Lucy, you were diving into the world of Gladiator, some 2 decades after the original film came out, and it won Best Picture. People have an experience with it. I'm wondering, when you were heading into production, what were you most anticipatory of when it came to stepping back into the world of such a well-known movie?
I think everybody was pretty scared. That's partly why it took 25 years. There was no version in which anybody wanted to rush a sequel because they were worried about seeming like a money grab for something. My husband, who produced the movie, they'd killed off the 2 leads, which, if you're trying to make a sequel, is not probably the first, not the biggest idea. And 2 of the other main actors had actually died. One died during the shooting, Oliver Reed. So that was, Mary was around for that. That was...
I was a young executive that advocated for that project. It was one of the first things I really fought for.
A long history.
But Doug called me on a Sunday to tell me that. I'll never forget that call.
Yeah, he won't either.
It was a $90 million insurance claim.
Yeah, they
And they had a brilliant solution. It's a good example of
They did have a
producing.
brilliant solution. But
face
they
replacement.
first, the insurance company said that Ridley would have to go back and shoot the whole movie, and it already shot more than half of it. And the idea for a director to have to go back and go back to Malta, go back to Morocco, reshoot the whole movie was like, they did come up with a great idea, which is a little CGI and a little bit of a different ending. But it was, I would say, a challenge for everybody. Interestingly enough, Ridley, who I can't say enough good things about when you talk about a director. You can do everything right as a producer, but if you don't have a good director,
You got nothing.
you're screwed. you can plug a lot of holes, but he has the whole movie in his head. He storyboards the whole movie long before we even have a finished script. As we're sitting in story meetings, which we did for almost 2 years, trying to come up with a story that we thought was worthy and a character that we thought would be worthy.
Yeah.
And we gave him a birthday party for his 86th birthday halfway through shooting, and we looked around the room, and all of the head of departments were the same ones.
All right.
So that's the loyalty that he
awesome.
had.
That's incredible.
The editor was different, but she didn't come to the party.
So it doesn't count.
And we had a female stunt coordinator, which was pretty great, who wasn't on the original movie. But we basically had all the same people, and everybody felt the same pressure. The cast was different, except for two people. But the pressure of walking onto the fully built Coliseum again for people, and even people that had only seen the movie and not worked on the first one, was a lot of pressure. So they all felt they had to top themselves.
Yeah.
And they were all pros, and they did, and they followed a fearless leader. And we found in our new cast of Pedro and Denzel and Paul, and Fred Heckinger and Joe Quinn, we found the perfect cast. We all love each other, and they love each other, and they love Ridley. It was one of those things that was a really hard movie to shoot. It was a much harder movie to have to stop shooting. We had to close down for 4 months, which when I hear about your movies and I think about the waste that we had to incur to shut down and leave a full-size Coliseum, 14 blocks of ancient Rome, 2,000 extras, costumes, props, 450 hotel rooms for the crew, and say goodbye. One day, 2,000 people on the set, the next day, dark. And I think about what it takes to do the movies that you do and how much it costs just to rent the scaffolding to hold up the Coliseum for an extra 4 months. And Paul Mescal had to work out for the entire 4 months because his body would have changed and we never knew when we were going back.
Yeah.
So the not shooting was as hard as the shooting. In our case, but
And working out for 4 months.
luckily he likes it.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah. We were lucky. I said the real reason why it took so long is we had to wait for Paul to be born.
And Mary, you have a similar situation where you were going back into a world for Dune Part 2. Of course, not 25 years. 25 years after, I was reading where you
Right away, almost, yeah.
Yeah, right away. You were beginning soft prep. I am wondering, when you have that such a truncated period, what are you bringing from that first experience to the second experience of making the second movie? Do you have time to really evaluate and say, okay, this is what we can do better, this is what we can do differently as compared to the first one? How were those conversations, if they existed?
Well, first, Denis, it goes back to, we are nothing without the writers, the directors, the talent, but he was very smart and said when we began the journey, we have to take this book, Frank Herbert's, brilliant book, and split it into 2 parts because to tell it all in one film would be very difficult. So we sort of laughed through the first one and said, well, this is the hard part, really setting the table for what's to come. Yeah. And then realizing for the rest of the book, it's like, okay, right now it's even, more world building, going deeper. And suddenly realizing, okay, this level of difficulty now and sort of, raising the stakes and taking, these characters that we've introduced. Because that's the thing about Denis, he's a really unique director in that he can tell, he works as successfully as an intimate character director as he does as somebody working, and painting on a very large canvas. So he effortlessly is able to toggle back and forth between the two. And a similar theme here, so much of it is authenticity. And because of what I think, Frank Herbert gave us, and was so much a meditation on power and, human dynamics and those relationships, it's grounding everything, even though you're building something that is, fictitious, it's grounded in real characters and real themes, so it's playing that out through. And the second one was really very much about going into that world.
And you're touching on something that you also brought up with Ridley, and you said in an interview, which I found fascinating, where it's very easy it's easier to work with a director who has a clarity of vision.
Absolutely.
I am one. Well, this is my question for everyone is, if you're working with a filmmaker who doesn't necessarily have that clarity, if you've ever come across that, how do you, is there a world where you can help them reach that?
Yeah, hopefully they have other strengths. I mean, I think all of us around the table have the luxury of working with some of the best filmmakers working, but then also I think it's equally as exciting to support new filmmakers, and hopefully, their discernible talents align with what the needs of the movie are. But that's part of what's exciting, is that you can support them in all the experiences you've had, to help take their talent, but channel the experience they haven't yet had to help them sort of see the icebergs in the water and to help them build that vision. But yes, I will always vote for get behind the strong vision and support that, be the sounding board for that and the guardian of that, always, yes. It's nice to have a map to know where you're going.
I agree. But there are some directors who find their ideas as they're going. I know that's not true of Denis. I know that's not true of Ed. I know that's not true of Ridley. I don't know. You'd have to tell me. But then there are other kinds of directors who find it as they're going, and that works too. It's harder.
Well, it's the best of both worlds, you hope. You hope that you can be prepared enough where you can go out there and you can do what the director has planned, and then you discover things.
Yeah.
Because that's the truth. Things do evolve
Yeah.
in ways that you can't always predict.
Yeah.
And then if you can, those are the best productions, I feel like, where you can create an environment where people can do what's planned, but also experiment, explore, and some of the best things in movies come from things that weren't
But
planned.
do you think people can make something that isn't them? I mean, it's so interesting to me that films usually are who's made them.
Well, that's one of the first questions, right? We all ask directors, which is, what is their reason for being? Why are they making this movie? And what is at the core for them, right? And understanding that DNA. And it may be disguised as something else, or whatever it is within the genre. But hopefully they have. If they don't, that's a good red flag.
Yeah.
If there's not really a reason, or they don't know why they're making the movie.
I think you're right. It's the meeting of a person with material. And sometimes that material comes from inside them. And sometimes it's something that you've given them. But actually it's the meeting of them with that story that makes something special or not, really, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, I think with Greg too, he kind of knew, I think you have to understand the core. Because if you don't, it's really hard to find your way. Yeah. And from there you blossom. And I think for him, I really understood the vision, but within that vision was this level of flexibility of what happened, bring in these real people and their stories, their lived experience, be flexible around that. So there were certain areas of the draft when we had a draft that were just like, they talk about their perfect place. Like, it wasn't written in the script. And so knowing that there was space for life to come in to the film, and we knew that we would kind of go in that direction, but definitely I think
That's where inspiration can come from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have to be comfortable with that process.
Yeah, the uncertainty
when you
of
don't
that,
know
too.
the answer, and they don't know the answer, and it's still going on. So you have to be comfortable in the exploration too, and sometimes that's really
I
hard.
think that's key, though. I think a lot of this job is about being able to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And if you're not equipped for that, it's a very difficult job, because I think to bring that energy, even when you're like, okay, we're at a cliff, we're at a precipice, or this isn't working, it's figuring out how to break through that and not bring that energy in a way, like if you're freaking out, it's gonna freak everybody else out, you know? So even if you're really sweating it, you know, and knowing that you're in trouble, you've got to stay focused, figure out how you're gonna get to the other side of it. I always say that, I don't know about you guys, but usually a film will be a moth before it's a butterfly. You know, when you're going through that,
I'm stealing that.
You have to,
I like that.
yeah, you have to remind yourself because you can be really sweating. You're like, oh gosh, you know, we got to get through this. But if you start to panic, you know, that's when fear, I'll quote Dune, fear is the mind killer, you know, and we're seeing a lot of that in the business right now. You know, so many people are driven by fear right now that like everyone's jumping ship. And that's one thing as a producer, you can never jump ship. Because if you panic, I think you start to make fear-based decisions, you know, knee-jerk decisions. And you just gotta ride through the storm. You know, that's what I've learned. And especially now in this environment, it's just, you're like, oh, they just went out the door. Whoops, they're right off the side of the boat, you know? And you've just gotta, while being honest, you know, and objective, stay the course to get through. And you will break through.
Yeah.
You know, not every film turns out the way that you want it to. Obviously, if we're not more right than wrong, we don't get to keep doing what we're doing. But that's the most damaging, I think, is when the producer starts panicking.
I also think the opportunity for serendipity and to pivot is a huge part of our job and the director's job. On Gatsby, we all were looking forward to shooting the scene where Gatsby meets Daisy since it's a big part of the movie. And we drove 2 hours to our location and it was pouring rain for the entire day. So we couldn't shoot. So we went back again, leaving trucks stuck in the mud. It was that kind of rain. We went back again and it was pouring again. The third time we said, we'll shoot it in the rain.
Right.
And it was not how it was in the book, but it was a great scene. Leo comes drenched in rain. That's what we had, and that's what we used. So I think part of it is, and I think it's a really fun problem-solving part, but you're right, it's scary.
Yeah.
And I also think the best producers and the best directors try to get the best from whoever they have, and so they listen to. I think that with newer directors, at least in my experience, and there's some that are just geniuses out of the box, and God bless them, but some of them want to control it too much, and you think, listen to the DP.
Yeah.
Don't do anything you don't want to do, but listen and learn. Listen to the production designer. The costumer can help you figure out so many things about the character that you never thought of. And for me, the biggest pleasure is when I can say, in a million years, I could have never thought of that. Thank you. That's where you know you're in the right place at the right time, when the other people are bringing things that nobody else could have done, and even the director can't have all of it in his head, her head.
But even being open to that serendipity can make things even better than you ever imagined.
Turning a negative into a positive. How many times does that happen?
This person's really funny. Let me give them more to do. That's, you know, a lot of stuff like that. So it's thinking on your feet.
I've had trucks stuck in mud. Revenant, yes. I know what that is. You pivot.
A lot of mud. Filmmaking is 90% mud.
Some of those trucks, I think, are still there.
Left them. Tessa and Lucy, I love that both of you recreated Rome in your movies, but in very different ways.
That's how similar we are.
You have these massive set pieces in this movie. You have the Vatican, you have the Sistine Chapel, you have a Colosseum. When you are looking at the screenplay for the first time, when you see those massive set pieces, are you just going, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Or does your mind immediately go into problem-solving mode?
It's the honest truth. Reading the screenplay is for me always about story and character. And it was only once Edward started that, casting and problems and, the actual practicalities of how Rome would look. Yeah. And then in the end, it was about how like Rome he wanted as much of it to feel like, whilst also being able to bring a really contemporary feel against it, so that there was contrast, a kind of jagged contrast to the beauty that the modern kept hitting the ancient. And so what he did with Susie Davis, our production designer, and a most wonderful location manager, we had the most amazing Italian crew, but Roberto was our location manager, and they pieced together this kind of amazing patchwork that was the Vatican, of mostly Roman locations, a little bit out of Naples, and then this set that was built at Cinecittà.
Lucy, what about for you?
Well, luckily, we had a movie that people already liked.
Yeah.
So it was one of the few times Mary heard me say this, where the studio wanted to make the movie.
Yeah, that is there.
Yeah.
But we did have a lot of trouble holding on to some of the big action pieces, which obviously are part of why people see the movie, and part of it is the intimate, personal drama. And we always, whenever the studio got a little rough with us, we would say, well, we can always take out the naval battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We know one way to save money.
Yeah. And they're like, no, no, no.
And I said, well, then what about the rhino? I go, yeah, we could take out the rhino, because we couldn't shoot the rhino the first time because you couldn't, it was too expensive to do the CGI then. And so Doug called the rhino wrangler, such as it is, and said, well, what about bringing a real rhino? And he said, well, they're not that trainable. Once they start to run, they can't stop. So it was like
A few deaths.
Okay. Let's save the rhino till later. But our sets took so many months to build that I keep being embarrassed about our costs compared to the beautiful movies that you guys make for so much less. But it did take months to build it, and so our production designer is in another country just building away to his heart's content, and nobody was was there supervising. So the first time when we went, we thought, oh my God, it's a little bigger. It's a little bigger. It's a little bigger than we thought. But that was also a privilege, because we did have the feeling you can't help but compare the end of Rome, which is our story starts at the beginning of the decline, and certain bells are ringing in contemporary life.
Oh, really?
But we had a feeling that there may never be another build like this again, so we felt the privilege of the old-fashioned way of making a movie where you could build it, because now mostly so much is CGI, and we did do CGI enhancements, plenty of them, but we did actually step into the Coliseum, and every single person felt it when we did it. Dean Tavaleris told a story. I worked for Francis Coppola for a few years when he had the little studio Zoetrope in Los Angeles, and he told a story about how he put in hardwood floors in The Godfather, and then they decided to put carpet on top of the hardwood floors, and then somebody yelled at him and said, how could you put hardwood floors and then waste the money and put carpet on top? And he answered, the actors will act better knowing that there's hardwood underneath that carpet. And then he paused and said, and they did.
I love that, and I believe it.
I had nothing to do with that story, but I thought I'd share it.
It's incredible. It is interesting talking about this tactile experience of being on set. Mary, I know Denis likes being a tactile filmmaker, doing things practically. When it comes to producing that, what does that entail? You know, I know this movie you were in the desert a lot more for part 2 than you just hate sand now.
No, you know what, it was inspiring, but he was right. I mean, there was something he was also very clear about from the start, to really put boots on the ground, and nature and humans' relationship to nature is a big part of what the movie is. And it's impossible to replicate that. It was actually really inspiring and humbling, you know, getting up in the morning and seeing the sunrise, and we were all in very good shape, hiking in the dunes, you know, it was wonderful, you know, and tremendous DP, Greg Fraser, you know, and dealing with the elements in that regard. Knock on wood, we got very lucky. We didn't have a big sandstorm, you know, we were able to get through it. The movie gods were in our favor. We did it obviously later in the year, just for heat, you know, and for the actors wearing, you know, these suits, and it was still very hot, you know. But that was you know, again, it goes back to understanding, I think, the director's vision, the DNA of the film. You said a little bit, Amy, I think that's one of the key things as a producer, is to be able to, you know, in collaboration with the director, like, what is the DNA of the movie? What are the key things that if we don't do this, obviously we want to do everything to the best of its ability, but what are the things that if we don't deliver on really, the film's not going to work, the story is not going to work, and being mindful of those things, because at the end of the day, there's a limitation. You know, I've worked on films of, you know, small scale, big scale. There's never enough money. You know, obviously there's a lot more money on bigger films, but you're spending a lot more money too. And, you know, trying to be really cost conscious, not diminishing returns, but mindful of where you're going to put that money. So it's really, you know, you got to understand, like, what what is the story we're telling? Where do we really need to spend the money here? Where can we find other ways to discover new people, bring more people up, you know? And that's important. And those are the things to always be mindful of, because otherwise, you know, it's easy to get away from you, right? Great directors are always very mindful of that, but you've got to make sure you're figuring out constantly how to support them in doing that. And I find that directors aren't continually pushing. I like that tension, you know, where they're, I want to do it again, or I got to keep pushing, you know, and then working with them to figure out, it's like, okay, now now we got to move on to this, but figuring out how to really push the boundaries, discover new things, and make sure you're delivering on what the essence and the DNA of the film is. Otherwise, I don't think you really have a shot, you know, of making something great. And that's hard. It's a lot harder than it seems. If it were easy, every film would be great, you know. If filmmaking were easy, you know, we'd see a lot, the quality of the films would be a lot better. It's tough, you know, especially in this environment.
Yeah, it's that healthy tension can breed something beautiful.
Yeah. That's something Tony Garnett used to say. Yeah. Tony Garnett used to say, you have to be a sort of a loving challenger. And it was that idea that you put your arm around
That's a really
your
good way.
real project.
Yeah.
And that gave you the right. You say, look, I love this, and I'm completely behind you, and everything you want is what I want to achieve, and I'm going to be really tough. And he did that.
Yeah, he did. He did. And I think it's interesting what you say and what Mary said, because I think so much of the job of being a producer, because the days are so hard.
Yeah.
Once you know, 6 o'clock and you're starting, like, there's a million things that are happening.
Yeah.
And even the director can get a little lost in just getting the day. Yeah. So it feels to me like, at least for myself, one of the things that I find helpful is to talk to the director about what it was they meant. Right? What was it that you wanted this to be? And to try to say, remember the conversation we had when this was what that scene was about, right? Because it can be about a lot of other things when you get on the set, rather than what it's actually about. And getting what it's about is actually what you want to get.
You have nothing. Denise, a writer-director, filmmaker I'm working with right now, is a writer-director, helps a lot to...
the most disrespected
you know.
people on the movie are the people
A
that
good
actually are the
script
most
never hurt a
important.
movie.
That feels like a T-shirt.
Yeah, script never.
Could I also just add, Lucy, I think that, we, whether it's $1 million or $5 million or $10 million or $300 million,
It's all relative.
there are always issues. You know, like, we might not have had as much money as Gladiator, but I never had to get a rhinoceros. Or build a Coliseum.
That's
You
what I
know,
was
like,
thinking
it's
too.
all relative.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
it is.
any movie is impossible.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
a miracle when a movie.
They're all
First,
different.
it's
It
a
is a
miracle
miracle.
to even get a movie
Yeah.
made.
Exactly.
Forget it.
Get it off the ground.
They're all
Good.
different. You're right. That's
And
one of the
have
biggest
it work
mistakes you
well
can make.
It's a
miracle.
It's a miracle, and it's a miracle that we better be able to continue, because people have to go to the theaters and see these movies, and we have to make them good enough that they don't say, well, I don't see one I want to watch. And that's...
But that goes back to turning a negative into a positive, right?
Yeah.
And so challenging everybody to do their best work, because I think as an industry, we got away with it for a long time. You know?
I also think you can almost do anything now with VFX and special effects. 'Cause the Rhino was both. But if you don't protect your actors so that they can be real characters that you can empathize with and care about, you're going to have a soulless movie. And it's going to. And when directors are lost, sometimes they overdo the production design, or they focus on the wrong thing because they don't. They lost the DNA, which is I'm stealing that from all of you guys. But
Soulless is a good word.
so I think that you know, doing the spectacle and protecting the actors and making them your partners, and also casting is so important. If you get the right actor, you're watching something that's different and better and luckier than even what was on the page.
Yep.
Then you say, I had the right career, I made the right choice, I love my work.
Speaking of protecting actors, Monique, I would be remiss without speaking about Sing Sing's financing structure, which I find so
was the
interesting.
financing?
Yeah, I mean, when you first told me about it, I fell in love with it. I found it to be incredible, but you know, from everyone from on Sing Sing's set, from the PA to the star, were all paid the same salary. And then everyone was given equity in the film. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering, did you notice that structure affect behavior on set? And ultimately, why did you all decide to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that was, so the financing structure was something that Greg and Clint brought to me when they pitched me the movie, because they had done it on their previous film, Jockey. And, they said, we tried this model and we want to scale it up. Not much bigger, we're still on an indie budget, but with a 50-person crew, and, do you think you can help us figure out how to do it? And I thought it was the right way. Just intuitively, I was like, this is the right way to do this because of the way we were building it as a community and how much we were trying to create a space for exchange with the community. And so, yeah, the structure is that there's pay parity across the board. So from Coleman to the PA through post, everyone gets paid the same rate. And we had SAG was our union, so we used the SAG rate for the budget level we were on. And it's the same daily or weekly rate, so everyone gets the same. And then everyone participates in the back end, and based on the period of time that they work on the film, the phase of the film. So, the value proposition is that everyone has the same inherent value. The only variable is time. And we felt like that was the way to really kind of, talking about the DNA, really build the DNA in such a way that everyone felt like they weren't an employee, but they were a stakeholder. And
That's so clever.
and because it's a small film, and also, doing pay parity in that way for an indie film is just a way also to, the budget is lowered as
Turning a
well.
negative into a positive.
The budget is lowered, and also everyone knows they're gonna have to really empty the tank, because we still have, a 50-person crew is not a very large crew either, and so everyone is still, going beyond to get the film done, but then they're also participating if the film is successful. And one thing we learned too was that it created that culture. It's like, I think as producers, we're always trying to nurture and create a culture on set that can bring out the best of everyone's work, and that everyone can feel like they have ownership in some way of the story, and also creating a culture of exchange. Like Greg was very much like, I want to erase the line. He's like, I don't even want to see a budget with above the line and below the line. He's like, change the budget. I don't want to see above the line. And so he was like, there's no hierarchy here. I want everything to be, I want there to be an exchange between the cast and the department heads.
That's
and the
amazing.
DP and everything. But also kind of building the financing with that in mind, I think helped everyone come on board. And we found that people leaned into it. Also as a producer, it's like there's no negotiating.
That's so
It's selfish.
It is what it is. Selfishly, it's kind of like the budget. And also, it's just like, if you can't do it, it's okay. It's not for you. But then the people who wanted to do it leaned into it.
Bravo to you. Bravo.
It's like a barrier to entry at that point, where you're like, okay, these people who are buying in.
And thankfully we were fortunate enough to sell the film such that we were able to issue checks to over 90 artists in the movie in the end at a time.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We have to change our financing structure to make our business functional, I think. Truly, because I think we won't be getting the most talented people attracted to it anymore if they feel like they're working for the man and they're not working for their own work, and they're not compensated for their work, for getting whatever stupid high salaries some people get. Owners of companies are raking in much more, and I think which is not a popular opinion among the people that finance movies, but until people can participate more, I think we will have a brain drain of talent that says, I don't want to work as a paid salary person for somebody else. I am entrepreneurial, I'm an artist.
I agree. It's the opposite of what all the streaming companies have done, because they pay you all this money up front, right? And it was, I think, if people could bet on the movie and do more what you're talking about. I think people work differently.
I speak to a lot of young producers who talk about the difficulty of being in the space, and I know there's a lot of efforts happening, whether it's, ensuring healthcare in between projects or, speaking to things about development fees. I'm wondering for you all as very successful producers in the space, what needs to happen in order to create a producing field as a sustainable profession?
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah. Can you guys fix Hollywood? Is what I'm asking.
I was president of the Producers Guild for 4 years, and you cannot make a living as an entry-level producer right now, or as a struggling director waiting for your first movie. And the question is a question that everyone should be asking, but the answer is we have to figure out a way to have people be able to live, except if their parents are paying for their apartment. I mean, that's not a way to have a healthy business.
No, but it's the same thing that's going on in our country.
Yeah, it's the same thing that's going on
The divide
Yeah.
between
So
people
it's-
is so severe.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think
And untenable.
Yeah, I feel like that was one of my first questions coming into producing. I went to the Sundance Producing Lab, and my first question was like, so how does this sustainable job? Can someone please share with me? Because also the way I like to work is, the development period can take years, but
That's
it's
the hard part.
necessary.
It does,
It's like
does take
you're working with a writer director, and it's like maybe the idea is just a tiny little idea, and it's starting, and over time you build and build and build, and I think it's worth it, and especially in the way that I've made my previous films of like you build relationships with community, that takes time. So it's a really crucial part of the process, but it's not funded. So then you're kind of working. So I'm like, okay, I just joined another project, and I'm, basically signing on to develop the project for who knows how long, unpaid. And that was the impetus, for me for joining, Producers Union, which was started by Rebecca Green, and then eventually Producers United, because it's like we need a collective where we're all working to figure out how to make this more sustainable, how to talk to studios, how to talk to agents, and figure out how to create, some sort of baseline standards of like healthcare, wage minimums, ways for people to, because also you're not, if you're not supported in that way, it also propels this structure of people of not really having a diverse group of talented producers and women, and people who can like support their lives and also put energy into the work. So I
Or
really
making
think
the
it's
wrong things.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I
The
gotta
UK has
focus
a
on this
little
one, we'll make
advantage
money.
in that it's always
or
had.
to make money on this one. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but it's had a bit of public money. And that public money has not necessarily paid producers. There's no such thing as a salary if you're developing a film for 5 years. But it has allowed
5 years
some...
is short.
Yeah, no, I know. I was taking it as a really happy moment. But it has made a difference that the public television companies, so Channel 4 and the BBC, and then now the BFI, but was British Screen, are committed to
Yeah, the
some
UK is
form
great
of
that way.
sustainable
Yeah.
investment in new filmmakers, producers, and so a little bit of overhead for young production companies, and that has made a difference. It's sort of shown that there's an intent for the diversity that you're talking about, for the inclusion of people who couldn't ever imagine a career in film might be possible. And I just thinking that great art comes from risk, which is what we all believe, means that the risk money has to be available so that sometimes it can burst into the market. And America doesn't have that. Softer.
No, we have guns instead.
Yeah. I know, I'm so sorry.
Well, for us, it was different too, because what we tried to do, we didn't have a big budget, and we tried to put all of the money on the screen. And when we came to a situation where we needed a little bit more money, the first thing that went was me and Alex Coco, my other producer,
Always.
cut.
Yeah.
Like,
Always.
we had a cut in ours, and we were like, okay, I don't have children. And he just had a baby. And I think it's something that we do this because we love it. We put everything into it, like we said, like development, everything. And sometimes it's hard to say, okay, well, we don't have this, but these are our babies. And this is, we love the art. And unfortunately, sometimes the thing is, the finances don't match that.
Next time, just say no. No fucking way.
Haven't you? I've thrown it, thrown in my salary many times as a producer doing it. It helps if you have a bigger salary to throw in, obviously, but many times on a smaller film I did, I paid for some of the pre-production, hoping, knowing that there was a risk that it wasn't going to go. I mean, sometimes you just don't have a choice,
Yeah, but the producer doesn't always have to be the first person to cut their fee.
Like, why is it always like the
often is,
first
though.
one? Yeah.
It's just another reason why every movie is a little miracle.
For sure.
It's incredible. And I'm so sad to say this, but we are at our hour. I know. I know. I can't thank you guys enough for joining us, and congratulations on all of your movies. They're all incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.